presented. This presentation just astounded me, and I was so enriched by it. And of course, it followed from there that he invited me and my wife to come and share with his congregation there in Orlando. And of course, we continue to communicate with each other, and just this past week, we were back there, and of course, he and his wife, Sister Ruth, were not, but they made me feel just at home. And Matthew, his son, Matthew, would you stand up, please, so we can see you? We're happy to have you this morning. And but I am just excited to begin this conversation with a dear friend and brother, one who has traveled and continues to travel all over the world, teaching and preaching the gospel. Has worked. He works with the founder and people who operate Trinity Broadcast Network. You have seen him. Some of you have seen him on that network. I'm going to ask him to introduce himself and to tell us he is working on a project in terms of his own academic pursuits. He wanted to come here and do that, but we did not have the setup for him to do it. But he is also working around the globe, with especially in countries on the continent of Africa and in South America, that we need to be more in line with in terms of doing ministry, and friends that we need to have for doing ministry. Brother Chironna, would you now talk to us in your own way?
Dr. Earl, it's an honor to be here with you and with all the distinguished faculty and friends at ITC. Certainly I am deeply appreciative of who you are, what you carry. You have had a major impact on my life. When we both presented at Archbishop Brantley's, and I heard you share on the sufferings of Job, having had gone through for me a 3.5-year, very painful, dark journey. I had never, in all my years of preaching or hearing preachers, and I've been around some pretty significant preachers, I've never heard anyone articulate in the course of an hour the wisdom of the sufferings of Job the way I heard you. And it immediately endeared me to you because of the way God has framed your perception of who he is, what he's about. And my journey is an interesting one in that my educational journey, I was a Bachelor of Arts graduate of music and education, but at that time I was converted, and so I double majored in religion, studied Greek in my undergraduate courses, and then comparative religion and all the things that were part of religious studies at Wagner College. Ended up going to a non-denominational Bible school for 3 years. After that, I got a Master's of Divinity from a Baptist school that didn't know what to do with a covenant theologian that wasn't a dispensational. And so that was interesting. They had to give me the degree because I did the homework, and even though my my view of Scripture was different than theirs. So listen, I've learned to agree with everybody, so, and then I got a PhD in leadership based on the work of, because of the nature of prophetic ministry, I pursued a degree in leadership from a prophetic perspective. That was years ago. And then in 2000, having spent all these years in ministry, pastoral ministry, I began to feel as though there was something missing in terms of what I would call soul work. That bringing people to wholeness required more than our dogmatic approach to theology or our systematic approach to theology, that there needed to be an integration between the spiritual, theological, and the soulical and psychological. And so I was accepted at Saybrook University, which of all places is the seat of the secular humanist potential movement, where Rollo May was the founder and Abraham Maslow was the co-founder along with Carl Rogers. Ironically, sitting at Saybrook, I discovered that Rollo May was a Presbyterian pastor that came to a place in his journey where he was wrestling with the same things I was. And at the encouragement of Paul Tillich, he was provoked by Paul to become the father of existential psychology in America. And then to find out that Abraham Maslow was raised a Russian Orthodox Jew. They escaped the oppression of Russia at the turn of the century, moved to Brooklyn. And so when I began to study Maslow and found out that much of his understanding of the actualization of human potential came out of his Torah teachings growing up, that was quite something, because there was given to me, within the context of a totally secular discipline, a fresh appreciation for the dignity of man and for the pursuit that we all have for wholeness and well-being. My doctoral chair, who passed away, was the world's leading expert on William James. And so I did my master's on the person of Jesus in terms of his humanness and how he related to the divine. And I was pursuing the doctorate, and then I hit that long, dark tunnel. And in that long, dark tunnel, I could hardly function. I spent 3.5 years in extreme anxiety and depression, was on all sorts of meds and could hardly function, and really thought my life was over. So by the grace of God, he brought me through that. And I was just coming out of that when I met you. And it was at that time I wanted to complete the PhD, but wasn't sure that, and my doctoral chair had passed away, so the thought of, I wanted to sit at his feet because he was the world's leading expert on James. But in the process, God began to redirect me to look at semiotics. And there was a man that wrote about dark signs and obscure symbols that provoked me to look at semiotics. The only problem was, because I had a psychology degree as a master's, I could not parlay that into a doctoral degree in theology with ITC. But because I'm a good friend of Leonard Sweet, Len was able to work out a way in which George Fox University took all my credits in psychology towards the semiotics, the doctorate in semiotics and future leadership studies, which I'm in the midst of right now. And I've got about another 1.5 years and I'll be done. But with that semiotics degree, I will be able to combine the psychology and the theology, the spirituality and the psychology in a way that I think can integrate based on where we are. I think when we talk about globally, I think there's a crisis in leadership, and I think that the signs of our times need to be re-signed because the narrative demands it. And so from my perspective, the big question for me right now is, what's Jesus up to and where's he going? And if he is the sign that we are to follow and we are the signs that follow him, then what are the signs that we need to be looking at in the culture, globally and locally, that are indices of the Spirit's moving? And I think God's moving in places that the church hasn't gone yet. And that's the problem the church has, is that we want God to stay contained within the institutionalized form of what we call Christendom. And it seems as though God's doing an end run around the church and going places that we have not been willing to go.
Well, that's, thank you. Let's see if we can push the conversation a little further in a focalized direction. You focused us, but there's some concerns that we have in terms of what we are doing here
Sure.
at ITC. Say some more, if you will, about how we have done this as a church, made this compromise in terms failing to understand the Spirit of God and where God is moving us. Do you see that do you think that that's been a problem with seminaries as well?
No, I think seminaries are doing the best they can with what they have based on what has been handed to us. I think we need dogmatic theology. I think we need systematic theology. I think we need to understand how to exegete the text. I think where we are, though, in a postmodern culture where the prevailing paradigm is there are no absolute truths, so we question everything. In that kind of a context, whoever tells the best story wins. So what we need to do is become refamiliarized with the narrative we've been entrusted with and understand how that narrative plays itself out in a context of a culture that doesn't believe in absolutes. Now, the irony is when a secular postmodern says there are no absolutes, they are making a definitive absolute statement. And so what they're really saying is the only absolutes are the ones that I believe in. And so they have their narrative. So I think we are living in a day when we need to recover the beauty of the narrative and find out how it fits into the context of where we are and where we're going.
Say some more about that in terms of the seminary, because seminaries are, standalone seminaries, as you know, many of them are having a real struggle for their own lives, existence now. Say some more about that.
For sure, and because the culture is now challenging every presupposition that, at least for those in Christendom, we have held and as tradition, seminaries are going to have to do something to reinvent themselves in terms of the way we present the truth, present the narrative, and invite conversation. And so one of the things for me that I would say based on my journey thus far is that there needs to be some sort of a national conversation on what we can do in academia to make sure our voice is not eliminated from the conversation. Brueggemann, when Brueggemann deals with the fact that the pit is virtually the place where Joseph and Jeremiah find themselves when the powers that be want to remove their word from the sentence, then at some point we need to either see ourselves as Joseph's and Jeremiah's and find out in the narrative how we get out of the pit and actually become the voices that people listen to precisely because of being marginalized.
Wow. Yeah, you mentioned Brueggemann. In terms of the African American community, what do you because we've already, marginalization has been kind of a place of normalcy for us. How do you see us, these communities, from where you sit, making a contribution to that narrative in a new way? Let me give you an example. If you take TBN, I noticed that most of the audience, or so many of the audiences now are heavily, that are on that station are heavily populated with African Americans.
Absolutely.
Say a word about that.
Well, here's what I think. You're talking about a white guy from New York that doesn't know what culture he really fits in for a number of reasons. I marched with the Young Democrats at 14 years old. My dad was a staunch Republican. The state senator was his dear friend, and I was marching on behalf of all sorts of things going on in the civil rights movement, and the senator called my father because he happened to be at the demonstration and said, "What's your son doing there?" And when I got home, I said, "Dad, you taught me that everybody is equal.